Who was this guy? The Mafia boss exploded with jealousy when he saw his assistant on a date. The bistro was the kind of place where politicians made silent deals and criminals discussed business over expensive wine. Danilo Milani had used it a dozen times for exactly that reason. The lighting was low enough for privacy, the walls thick enough for discretion, and the staff smart enough to never remember faces. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's go back to hours before where it all started. Tonight was supposed to be simple. 15 minutes with a contact from Milan, a signature on a contract, then home to his estate before midnight. But the moment Danilo stepped through the entrance, his entire world tilted on its axis. He saw her immediately. His eyes found her the way a predator finds movement in tall grass, instinctive and instant. Sarah Shade. She sat at a corner table near the window, bathed in the warm amber glow of an overhead pendant light. Her caramel skin seemed to shimmer against the emerald silk of her dress, the fabric clinging to her curves in ways her work attire never did. Her dark brown hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders, catching the light every time she moved. She looked soft, relaxed, beautiful in a way that made something dangerous coil tight in Danilo's chest. And she was laughing. Not the polite, measured sound she made during business calls. Not the tight, professional smile she gave him when he asked her to stay late. This was genuine, warm, real. Danilo's jaw locked. The man across from her leaned forward, saying something that made Sarah's eyes light up. He was blonde, clean-shaven, wearing a navy suit that screamed safe and predictable. His expression was open, friendly, the kind of man who probably opened doors and sent flowers the next day. Everything Danilo was not. The man reached across the table, his hand moving toward Sarah's. Danilo stopped breathing. His tattooed fingers curled into fists at his sides, the intricate black ink shifting over his knuckles like living shadows. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to move, to cross that room, to do something. Mr. Milani? The hostess appeared beside him, clipboard in hand, her smile professional and practiced. Your table is ready. Your associate called ahead and change of plans. Danilo's voice was low, controlled, but underneath, it was the rumble of an earthquake waiting to happen. The hostess blinked. I'm sorry, I need a table. His dark eyes never left Sarah's face, one with a clear view of the window section. The hostess followed his gaze, and her expression shifted into something knowing. Of course, sir. Right this way. She led him to a table 3 spots away from Sarah's. Close enough to see everything. Close enough to hear her laugh again when the blonde man said something else that Danilo couldn't catch. He sat down slowly, his movements deliberate, his posture rigid. The menu remained untouched in front of him. He didn't care about food. He didn't care about the meeting. He cared about the way Sarah leaned slightly forward, the way her fingers played with the stem of her wine glass, the way she looked at this stranger like he was worth her time. Like Danilo wasn't the center of her universe. One of his men, Marco, approached the table with a cautious expression. Boss, your contact is running about 10 minutes late. Traffic on the... Sit. Danilo didn't look at him. Marco sat. Tell me what you see, Danilo said quietly. Marco followed his line of sight, and his eyes widened slightly. That's Miss Shade. I know who it is. She's with someone. I can see that, Marco. A pause. Marco shifted uncomfortably. Looks like a date, boss. Danilo said nothing. His jaw worked, muscle ticking beneath his beard. The tattoos on his hands seemed darker in the low light, more pronounced, like they were rising to the surface of his skin. Sarah laughed again. The sound cut through the restaurant noise like a blade. The blonde man stood up, probably heading to the restroom, and every cell in Danilo's body locked onto the opportunity like a missile finding its target. He was on his feet before Marco could speak. Boss! But Danilo was already moving across the restaurant floor, his 6 feet 4 inches frame cutting through the space like a shadow made solid. Other diners glanced up instinctively, sensing something predatory in the air, then quickly looked away. Sarah was studying the dessert menu when she heard the footsteps. Something in the rhythm made her spine stiffen before she even looked up. When she did, her breath caught. Danilo. He stood at the edge of her table, hands in his pockets, the picture of controlled power. But his eyes, those dark, burning eyes, told a different story entirely. Mr. Milani. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. What are you doing here? Having dinner. His tone was conversational, but there was steel underneath. Same as you, it seems. I'm not. She set down the menu, her fingers trembling slightly. This is my personal time. I can see that. His gaze flicked to the empty chair across from her, then back to her face. Who is he? That's none of your business. Sarah. The way he said her name was both a warning and a plea. Who is he? She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes with a spark of defiance that sent heat racing through his veins. A friend. Friends don't look at you the way he was looking at you. And how was he looking at me? Danilo leaned down, bracing one tattooed hand on the back of her chair. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting. Like he thinks he has a chance. Sarah's breath hitched. The air between them crackled with something dangerous, something neither of them could name. You don't own me, Danilo. I never said I did. Then why are you standing at my table? Her brown eyes flashed. Why are you here, interrupting my night, acting like? Like what? He moved closer, his mouth near her ear. Say it, Sarah. Like you're jealous. The word hung between them, sharp and true. Danilo straightened slowly, his expression unreadable except for the fire burning in his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet. You're wearing the dress I saw you buy 3 months ago. The one you said was too expensive, too impractical, too everything. And now you're wearing it for him. Sarah's face flushed. How did you? I notice everything about you. Sarah shade. His tattooed fingers tightened on her chair. Every single thing. Footsteps approached. The blond man was returning, his easy smile faltering when he saw Danilo standing over Sarah. Sarah. The man's voice was uncertain. Is everything okay? For a long moment, nobody moved. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched Danilo's jaw clench, watched the way his knuckles went white against the dark wood of her chair. She could feel the violence simmering beneath his skin, could see it in the way his entire body had gone still, the kind of stillness that came before an explosion. Sarah, the blond man repeated, taking a step closer. Do you know this guy? That was the wrong question. Danilo's eyes finally shifted to the man, and Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had seen that look before, usually right before someone ended up in the hospital or worse. It was the look of a predator sizing up prey, calculating exactly how much damage he could inflict before anyone could stop him. Abelino. Sarah stood quickly, her chair scraping against the floor. She positioned herself slightly between the two men, her hands raised in a placating gesture. This is Mr. Milani, my employer, your employer. Abelino's confusion was evident. He looked from Sarah to Danilo and back again, clearly trying to understand why her boss was hovering over their date like a storm cloud. I didn't realize you'd be working tonight. She's not working. Danilo's voice was silk over razor blades. Are you Sarah? The question felt like a trap. No, Sarah said carefully. I'm not. Then this is quite the coincidence. Abelino extended his hand toward Danilo, his smile friendly but strained. Abelino Padavisi. Nice to meet you, mister. We need to go. Danilo didn't even glance at the offer hand. His eyes stayed locked on Sarah. Now. Sarah blinked. Excuse me. There's an emergency at the estate. Security breach. I need you there immediately. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that for half a second Sarah almost believed him. But she knew Danilo Milani better than anyone. She knew when he was negotiating a deal, when he was threatening someone, and when he was lying through his teeth. This was the latter. A security breach, she repeated slowly, her voice tight with barely contained anger. At 10 o'clock on a Friday night. Yes, and you need your assistant to handle it. That's what I said. You have 12 armed men at the estate, Danilo. You have a security team that's paid specifically to handle breaches. You have. I have you. His hand moved from the chair to her elbow, his grip gentle but absolutely unyielding. And I need you there. Right now. Sarah felt her blood pressure spike. She could see exactly what he was doing, could read the possessive fury in every line of his body. This had nothing to do with security and everything to do with the fact that he couldn't stand watching her smile at another man. Mr. Milani. Abelino's voice had lost some of its warmth. I'm sure whatever this is can wait until Monday. Sarah deserves her time off. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. Danilo turned his full attention to Abelino for the first time, and Sarah watched the other man instinctively take a step back. Danilo didn't raise his voice, didn't make any threatening gestures, but somehow his mere presence felt like violence waiting to happen. And you are? Danilo asked softly. I told you. Abelino Padavisi. That's a name, not an answer. Danilo's tattooed fingers drummed once against Sarah's arm. What are you to her? A friend. Friends. Danilo's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Sarah has many friends. I've never met any of them before tonight. Strange, don't you think? Sarah jerked her arm free from his grip, her patience finally snapping. Stop it. Stop what? You know exactly what. She turned to face him fully, ignoring Abelino's confused expression. There is no security breach. There is no emergency. You're lying. I never lied to you, Sarah. You're lying right now. Her voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. She lowered it again, but the fury remained. And I'm not leaving my dinner to play along with whatever this is. Something flickered across Danilo's face. Not quite hurt, but close to it. His jaw tightened, and for a moment Sarah thought he might actually back down. Instead, he pulled out his phone. Marco, he said without taking his eyes off Sarah. Send 2 men to the east perimeter. Tell them we have a potential breach near the server room. I want eyes on every entrance until Miss Shade and I arrive. He hung up. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. You can't be serious. Deadly serious. His expression was carved from stone. Your contract stipulates you're on call for emergencies, Sarah. This is an emergency. You can come willingly, or I can have Marco escort you. Your choice. The threat hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Sarah's hands curled into fists at her sides. She wanted to scream at him, wanted to tell him exactly what she thought of his manipulative, possessive, absolutely infuriating behavior. But she also knew Danilo Milani well enough to know he would do exactly what he threatened. He would send Marco. He would cause a scene. He would make sure everyone in this restaurant knew that Sarah Shade belonged to him, whether she agreed or not. You're unbelievable, she whispered. So I've been told. Sarah turned to Abelino, her chest tight with frustration and embarrassment. I'm so sorry. I have to. It's okay. But Abelino's expression said it really wasn't okay. He was looking at her like he was seeing something he didn't quite understand, something that made him uncomfortable. We can reschedule. I'd like that. Sure. The word was polite, but Sarah could hear the doubt in it, could see the way his eyes flicked to Danilo and then quickly away, like he was reassessing everything about the evening. Sarah grabbed her clutch from the table, her movements sharp with anger. She didn't look at Danilo as she brushed past him, didn't acknowledge the way his hand hovered near her lower back as they walked toward the exit. Marco was waiting by the door with the car already running. He took one look at Sarah's expression and wisely said nothing. The ride to the estate was silent. Sarah stared out the window, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. Beside her, Danilo sat like a king on a throne, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, watching her every micro-expression. You can't keep doing this, Sarah finally said as they pulled through the estate gates. Doing what? Controlling my life. Interrupting my personal time. Treating me like you're important to me? Danilo's voice was quiet, but there was something raw underneath it. Like the thought of you with him makes me want to burn that entire restaurant to the ground. Sarah turned to stare at him, her breath catching at the naked honesty in his expression. The car stopped in front of the main house. Danilo got out first, then offered his hand to help her out. Sarah ignored it, climbing out on her own and marching toward the entrance with her heels clicking sharply against the stone driveway. She made it 3 steps before Danilo's voice stopped her cold. There's no security breach, Sarah. She turned slowly. I know that. I lied to get you here. To get you away from him. I know that too. Danilo walked toward her, his tattooed hands sliding into his pockets. In the moonlight, he looked like something carved from marble and ink, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. You can quit, he said softly. You can walk away right now. Tell me to go to hell. Find another job, another life, another man who will take you to dinner and hold your hand and make you laugh. Sarah's heart pounded. Why would I do that? Because I can't give you normal, Sarah. His voice was rough, stripped of all its usual control. I can't be the kind of man who brings you flowers and calls you sweet names and lets you go at the end of the night. I can't watch you with someone else and not lose my mind. The confession hung between them like shattered glass, sharp and irreparable. Sarah took a shaky breath. What are you saying, Danilo? He moved closer, close enough that she could see the exact moment his control finally cracked. I'm saying that dress is mine. Your laugh is mine. Every smile, every look, every moment you waste on men who don't deserve you, it's all mine. His voice dropped to barely more than a whisper. I'm saying I'm a selfish, possessive bastard who will ruin your life if you let him. Sarah should have run, should have turned around, called a car, and never looked back. Instead, she met his eyes and asked the only question that mattered. And if I don't let you ruin it? Danilo's smile was slow, dangerous, and absolutely devastating. Then I'll ruin everyone else's until you do. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, replaying Danilo's words over and over until they lost all meaning and gained too much meaning at the same time. By the time dawn broke through her curtains, she had made a decision. If Danilo Milani wanted to play games, she would show him exactly what happened when he pushed too far. She arrived at the office at exactly 8 o'clock Monday morning, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression blank as fresh snow. The emerald dress was gone, replaced by a charcoal gray suit that was all business and zero warmth. Her heels clicked against the marble floor of the Milani building like gunshots, each step measured and deliberate. Marco was at his usual post near the elevator. He opened his mouth to greet her, took one look at her face, and promptly closed it again. Smart man. The executive floor was quiet when she stepped off the elevator. Danilo's office door was already open, which meant he'd been here for hours. He always arrived before everyone else, as if sleep was a weakness he refused to indulge in. Sarah walked past his door without looking in. She heard the subtle shift of movement inside, felt his attention snap to her like a physical thing, but she didn't pause. She went straight to her desk in the adjacent office, set down her bag with precise care, and powered on her computer. Her phone buzzed immediately. My office. Now. Sarah read the message, then calmly set her phone face down on the desk. She opened her email instead, scrolling through the overnight correspondence with the kind of focus usually reserved for bomb disposal. 30 seconds passed. Her phone buzzed again. Sarah. She archived 3 emails, flagged 2 for follow-up, and began drafting a response to a supplier in Milan. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with mechanical efficiency, each keystroke a tiny act of rebellion. The intercom on her desk crackled to life. Miss Shade, Danilo's voice came through the speaker, carefully controlled. I need to see you. Sarah reached over and pressed the button. I'm currently occupied with the morning reports, Mr. Milani. I'll be available at 9:15 for any urgent matters that require my attention. A pause. She could practically hear his jaw clenching through the speaker. This is urgent. Then I'm sure Marco can assist you until I'm available. She released the button before he could respond. The next sound she heard was his door slamming open. Sarah didn't look up from her screen, even as a shadow fell across her desk, even as she felt the weight of his stare trying to bore holes through the top of her head. What are you doing? His voice was low, dangerous. Working. She clicked send on the email. Was there something you needed, Mr. Milani? The formality of his title hung between them like a knife. Danilo braced his hands on her desk, leaning down until he was in her line of sight, whether she wanted him there or not. His tattooed fingers spread across the polished wood, the black ink stark against his olive skin. "Look at me," he said quietly. Sarah's eyes lifted, but they were cold, distant, like she was looking at a stranger. "I'm looking. What do you need?" "Don't do this." "Do what?" "My job." She tilted her head slightly. "I believe that's what you pay me for, Mr. Milani. Or did the terms of my employment change over the weekend?" His fingers curled against the desk. "Sarah, I have the updated contract from the Milan office that require your signature." She pulled a folder from her drawer with clinical precision. "The Romano deal closes on Wednesday, so I'll need these back by end of day. I've also scheduled your meeting with the accountants for Thursday at 2. You have a conference call with New York at 4 today, and Giuseppe wants to discuss the shipment delays before Friday." She set the folder in front of him without letting their fingers touch. "Anything else?" Danilo stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "You're really going to pretend Friday night didn't happen?" Friday night was a regrettable misunderstanding regarding a false security emergency. Her voice was perfectly pleasant, perfectly empty. "I've made a note to clarify the parameters of my on-call availability to prevent similar incidents in the future." "Similar incidents?" He repeated the words like they tasted bitter. "That's what you're calling it. Is there another term you'd prefer? I can update the employee handbook accordingly." Something flickered in his eyes, something that looked almost like pain before it hardened into anger. He straightened slowly, picking up the folder with movements that were just controlled enough to keep from crushing it. "Fine." The word was clipped. "If that's how you want to play this." "I'm not playing anything, Mr. Milani. I'm simply doing my job with the appropriate level of professionalism." She turned back to her computer, effectively dismissing him. Danilo stood there for another beat, 2, 3. Then he walked back into his office, and this time when the door closed, it was with a control that was somehow worse than the slam. The rest of the morning proceeded in exactly the same manner. Sarah responded to his requests with flawless efficiency and zero personality. She brought him coffee at his usual time, black with 1 sugar, and set it on his desk without a word. She transferred calls, organized files, and managed his schedule with the precision of a Swiss watch and the warmth of a winter storm. And through it all, she didn't meet his eyes once. By noon, Danilo looked like a man slowly being torn apart. Marco noticed it first. He'd brought up some paperwork that needed signing and found his boss staring at the wall with an expression that could strip paint. "Everything all right, boss?" "Fine." Danilo didn't look at him. "Where's Sarah?" "Lunch break." She went down to the cafe. Danilo's head snapped up. "Alone?" "Yeah, like always." Marco shifted uncomfortably. "Why?" But Danilo was already out of his chair, already moving toward the elevator with long strides that made Marco scramble to keep up. "Boss, what's going on?" "Nothing. Everything." Danilo jabbed the elevator button with more force than necessary. "I need to speak with her about the Romano contracts. She left them on your desk 3 hours ago." "Then I have questions." The elevator doors opened, and Danilo stepped inside before Marco could point out that he'd never once followed Sarah to lunch in the 3 years she'd worked for him. The company cafe was on the ground floor, all glass walls and modern furniture that was supposed to make employees feel valued. Danilo scanned the room and found her immediately, sitting alone at a corner table with a salad she wasn't eating and a book he couldn't identify from his distance. She looked completely content, completely at peace without him. It made him want to overturn every table in the room. He walked up to her table instead, his hands shoved in his pockets to keep from reaching for her. "Sarah." She looked up, and for a fraction of a second, he saw something real flicker across her face before it smoothed back into polite blankness. "Mr. Milani, was there something you needed?" "Stop calling me that. It's your name. You've never called me that before." He pulled out the chair across from her without asking. "Not in 3 years. Perhaps I should have been more professional from the start." She closed her book, marking her page with deliberate care. It might have prevented certain misunderstandings about the nature of our working relationship. "There's no misunderstanding about. Is there something work-related you needed to discuss?" She cut him off smoothly. "Otherwise, this is my lunch break, and I'd prefer to spend it in peace." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, and Danilo felt each one hit its mark. He leaned forward, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear. You're angry. I'm professional. You're punishing me. I'm maintaining appropriate boundaries. She met his eyes finally, and the ice in them could have frozen hell itself. Something I should have done a long time ago. Sarah, Mr. Milani. Her voice was quiet but absolute. You made yourself very clear on Friday. You're a selfish, possessive man who will ruin my life if I let you. So I'm not letting you. I'm doing my job. Nothing more, nothing less. And when I leave this office at the end of the day, my time is my own, just like it should have been all along. She stood, gathering her book and barely touched salad. Now, if you'll excuse me, my break is over. She walked away, leaving Danilo sitting alone at the table, watching her disappear back into the elevator with her spine straight and her expression carved from marble. Marco appeared at his elbow. Boss, the New York call is in 20 minutes. Danilo didn't move. He was staring at the empty chair across from him, at the space where Sarah had been, and feeling something foreign and uncomfortable twist in his chest. He'd spent years building an empire where his word was law, where men twice his size trembled at his tone, where nothing and no one existed outside his control. But Sarah Shade had just declared independence with nothing but silence and professional courtesy, and Danilo was beginning to realize he had absolutely no idea how to fight an enemy who refused to engage. For the first time in his life, Danilo Milani was losing a battle he didn't know how to win. The realization followed him back to his office, sat with him through the New York conference call, where he barely heard a word, and rode home with him in the back of his car, while Marco drove in careful silence. By the time Danilo walked through the doors of his estate, the sun had set and something cold had settled in his chest. If Sarah wanted professional, he would give her professional. But that didn't mean he was giving up. He poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey in his study, then picked up his phone. Antonio. He didn't bother with pleasantries. I need everything you can find on someone. Full background, employment history, financials, associates, everything. Name. Antonio's voice was crisp, efficient. He'd been doing this kind of work for the Milani family for 15 years. Abelino Padavisi. A pause. Is this business or personal, boss? Does it matter? For my billing rate, yes. Despite everything, Danilo felt his mouth twitch. Personal. I want it by morning. You'll have it in 3 hours. Danilo hung up and took a long drink. The whiskey burned going down, but it did nothing to touch the cold spreading through his veins. He moved to the window, staring out at the manicured grounds that stretched into darkness, and tried not to think about the way Sarah had looked at him in the cafe. Like he was nothing. Like 3 years of working side by side, of late nights in the office and early mornings reviewing contracts, of inside jokes and comfortable silences meant absolutely nothing. His phone buzzed 2 hours and 47 minutes later. The file Antonio sent was comprehensive. Danilo transferred it to his laptop and opened it on the massive desk that dominated his study. Then he poured another whiskey and began to read. Abelino Padavisi, age 32, born in Florence to middle-class parents, both teachers. 1 younger sister, married, 2 kids. Graduated from the University of Bologna with a degree in civil engineering. Currently employed as a project manager for a construction firm in the city. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. Danilo scrolled through the financial records. Steady income, nothing spectacular but comfortable. No debt beyond a reasonable mortgage on a modest apartment in a decent neighborhood. Savings account that showed regular deposits. Investment portfolio that was conservative but growing. He clicked through photos Antonio had pulled from social media. Abelino at a work event, smiling with colleagues. Abelino on a hiking trail, wind-blown and happy. Abelino at what looked like a family gathering, his arm around an older woman who had to be his mother. Normal. Safe. Boring. Danilo's jaw tightened. He kept reading. Abelino volunteered at a local community center on weekends. He played recreational soccer. He had a book club that met monthly. His friends described him as reliable, kind, and steady. One ex-girlfriend from 3 years ago had nothing bad to say about him, except that the relationship had run its course. No scandals, no affairs, No hidden addictions or secret debts or questionable associations. Danilo leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. He'd been hoping for something, anything he could use. A character flaw, a past mistake, evidence that Abelino Padavisi was just another man pretending to be good while hiding something rotten underneath. But there was nothing. The man was exactly what he appeared to be. Decent, honest, the kind of man who probably asked Sarah about her day and actually listened to the answer. The kind who would bring her coffee in bed and remember her birthday without needing a reminder. The kind who would never drag her away from dinner with a manufacturer emergency because he couldn't stand watching her smile at someone else. Danilo took another drink, longer this time. He opened a folder of photos Antonio had included from Friday night. Surveillance footage from the bistro's exterior cameras, grainy but clear enough. There was Sarah laughing at something Abelino said. There was Abelino reaching across the table with that easy, comfortable gesture. There was the moment Danilo had walked in, and even in a still image, you could see the exact second Sarah's entire body had gone tense. He clicked to the next photo. Sarah and Abelino outside the restaurant after Danilo had left with her. Abelino was saying something, his expression concerned. Sarah looked exhausted, apologetic. The last photo was Abelino watching Sarah get into Danilo's car. The man's face showed confusion, maybe a little worry, but nothing aggressive. No jealous tantrum, no demands. Just a nice guy watching his date leave with her terrifying boss and probably wondering what kind of situation he'd just stumbled into. Danilo closed the laptop harder than necessary. He stood and moved back to the window, whiskey in hand, and forced himself to acknowledge the truth he'd been avoiding since Antonio sent the file. Abelino Padavisi wasn't the problem. The man's only crime was being everything Sarah deserved and nothing like Danilo. He was sunlight to Danilo's shadows, safety to Danilo's danger, normal to Danilo's nightmare. He probably had a retirement plan. He probably wanted kids someday. He probably envisioned a future that included Sunday dinners with family and summer vacations and growing old with someone who didn't check the door for threats every time they entered a room. He could give Sarah a life. Danilo could only give her his. And his life was blood and ink and secrets that had to be kept in the dark. His life was looking over his shoulder in restaurants and vetting everyone who came within 10 feet of him. His life was built on a foundation of violence, held together by fear and respect and the understanding that mercy was a luxury he couldn't afford. What kind of man dragged a woman into that? The same kind who manufactured emergencies to sabotage her dates. The same kind who tracked her location and investigated her potential boyfriends. The same kind who couldn't let her go, even though letting her go was probably the kindest thing he could do. Danilo finished his whiskey and set the glass down with a controlled precision that cost him. He opened his laptop again and pulled up a blank document. Then he began to type. Ways Abelino Padavisi is unsuitable for Sarah Shade. He stared at the cursor blinking after the heading. His fingers hovered over the keys. Then, slowly, he deleted the line and typed something else. Ways I'm unsuitable for Sarah Shade. The list came easier than it should have. Too dangerous. Too violent. Too possessive. Too broken. Too old. Too established in a world she should never have to touch. Too selfish to let her go. Too aware that watching her build a life with someone like Abelino would destroy something fundamental in him. He deleted that document too. Then he pulled up Abelino's file one more time and studied the man's face in the photos. Really studied it. Tried to find the monster he wanted to see, the threat he could justify eliminating. But all he saw was a decent man who'd taken Sarah to dinner and made her laugh. All he saw was everything Danilo wasn't. His phone buzzed. A text from Marco. Boss, tomorrow's schedule is ready. Also, Ms. Shade requested the rest of the week off. Personal days. Should I approve? Danilo stared at the message for a long time. Personal days, which meant time away from the office. Away from him. Possibly time to see Abelino again, to let that comfortable relationship grow into something more without Danilo hovering over her shoulder like a curse. He should approve it. He should let her have her space, her life, her chance at normal. His fingers moved across the screen. Denied. We're too busy this week. She knows that. He sent the message, then immediately hated himself for it. But he didn't take it back. Instead, he sat in his study as the night deepened around him, surrounded by evidence of a man who was too good for the woman Danilo couldn't stop wanting, and wondered when exactly he'd become the villain in his own life. The dossier on Abellino Padovisi contained no usable ammunition, no hidden flaws to exploit, no justification for the things Danilo wanted to do to ensure the man never touched Sarah again. Just the stark, unavoidable truth that the biggest threat to Sarah's happiness wasn't the nice civil engineer who volunteered on weekends. It was the tattooed crime boss who couldn't imagine his world without her in it. Danilo closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and sat in the darkness of his study until dawn began to break through the windows. And when his phone rang at 7 with Sarah's number on the screen, he knew exactly what she was calling about. He answered anyway. "Good morning, Miss Shade." Her voice was ice. "My personal days were denied. We have the Romano deal closing. I need you here. You have 12 other people who can handle the Romano deal. But I want you." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush him. "I'm calling in sick," Sarah finally said. "All week." She hung up before he could respond. Danilo sat in his chair, phone still pressed to his ear, and acknowledged the final, devastating truth the dossier had revealed. Abellino Padovisi's only sin was being too safe for Sarah, and Danilo's only sin was being not safe enough. But he'd burn the world down before he let her go. The thought was still echoing in Danilo's mind 3 nights later when Antonio called with information he hadn't asked for but somehow knew he needed. "Your civil engineer has plans tonight," Antonio said without preamble. "He's meeting friends at Vesuvio, that new club on the waterfront. 9 o'clock. Danilo said nothing for a long moment. Through his office window, the city lights sparkled like a field of stars fallen to earth. Sarah had been gone for 3 days. 3 days of silence from her desk. 3 days of Marco nervously handling tasks that should have been hers. 3 days of Danilo feeling like something essential had been carved out of his chest. "Boss." Antonio's voice pulled him back. "What else?" "The friends are colleagues. 2 guys from his construction firm, both married. No indication that Miss Shade will be there." A pause. "You want me to confirm that?" "No." Danilo's jaw tightened. "I'll handle it." He hung up and stared at his reflection in the darkened window. A reasonable man would let it go, would give Sarah her space, let her make her own choices, accept that chasing away every man who looked at her wasn't a solution. It was a sickness. Danilo had never claimed to be reasonable. He was at Vesuvio by 9:30. The club was sleek and modern, all glass and steel with bass-heavy music that you could feel in your bones. Not his usual scene, but he'd been to worse places for worse reasons. The bouncer took one look at him and stepped aside without asking for ID. Inside, the crowd was thick with young professionals unwinding after work. Danilo moved through them like a shark through shallow water, his height and the cold intensity of his presence creating a wake of space around him. People moved without consciously deciding to, some instinct telling them to get out of his way. He found Abellino at the bar. The man was laughing at something one of his friends said, a beer in his hand, his tie loosened and his jacket draped over the back of his stool. He looked relaxed, happy, completely oblivious to the predator approaching from his blind side. Danilo stopped 3 feet away and simply waited. It took less than a minute. Abellino turned to signal the bartender and froze mid-gesture when he saw Danilo standing there. The smile slid off his face like water off glass. "Mr. Milani." Abellino's voice was carefully neutral, but Danilo could see the tension enter his shoulders. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Funny." Danilo's tone was conversational, almost pleasant. "I was thinking the same thing about you at that bistro last week." Abellino's friends had gone quiet, their conversation dying as they picked up on the sudden shift in atmosphere. They looked between Danilo and Abellino with a confused wariness of civilians who could sense danger but didn't understand its source. "Everything okay?" Abel, one of them asked. "Fine." Abellino didn't take his eyes off Danilo. "Just an unexpected coincidence." "I don't believe in coincidences." Danilo moved closer, closing the distance until he was standing directly beside Abelino at the bar. "Can I buy you a drink?" It wasn't a question. Abelino glanced at his friends, then back at Danilo. Some calculation happened behind his eyes, some assessment of risk versus reward. Finally, he nodded. "Sure, why not?" His friends drifted away to a nearby table, throwing concerned looks over their shoulders. Smart men. They couldn't articulate why, but they knew their friend was in trouble. Danilo ordered 2 whiskeys neat. When they arrived, he picked up both glasses and handed one to Abelino. The other man took it, but didn't drink. So, Abelino set the glass down on the bar. "What do you want, Mr. Milani?" "To talk." "About?" "Sarah." "I figured." Abelino's expression hardened slightly. "Look, I don't know what your deal is, but Sarah's an adult. She can make her own choices about who she spends time with." "Can she?" Danilo took a slow sip of his whiskey, letting the question hang. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like her choices are being influenced by people who don't understand the full picture." "And what picture is that?" Danilo turned to face him fully, and something in his eyes made Abelino instinctively lean back. "The picture where Sarah Shade works for me, where she has access to information that could destroy lives, where she exists in a world that men like you can't begin to comprehend. Men like me." Abelino's voice had an edge now. "You mean normal people? People with regular jobs who don't threaten others in nightclubs?" "I haven't threatened you." "Then what would you call this?" "A courtesy." Danilo set his glass down with deliberate care. "A conversation between 2 men about a woman who deserves better than to be caught in the middle of something complicated." "You're right." Abelino straightened his spine, finding some courage in his convictions. "She does deserve better. She deserves someone who doesn't drag her out of restaurants with fake emergencies. Someone who doesn't treat her like property." Danilo's expression didn't change, but the temperature around them seemed to drop. "Careful. Or what?" Abelino was warming to his theme now, the beer and righteousness making him bolder than was wise. "You'll do what exactly?" "We're in a public place. You can't just—" Danilo moved. It wasn't an attack. Not technically. He simply shifted his weight, angled his body, let his jacket fall open just enough to reveal the holster underneath. The motion was subtle, probably invisible to anyone watching from more than 5 feet away. But Abelino saw it. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened, then closed. His hand trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of the bar. "I told you," Danilo said quietly, his voice barely audible over the music. "I haven't threatened you. I'm simply making sure you understand the situation fully before you make any decisions you might regret." "Are you?" Abelino swallowed hard. "Are you seriously showing me a gun right now?" "I'm showing you reality." Danilo's tone remained conversational, almost kind. "Sarah exists in my world. A world where consequences are permanent and mistakes are expensive. You're a good man, Abelino. I can see that. You probably make your mother proud. But you're not built for the life that comes with being close to Sarah Shade. Maybe she doesn't want that life." Abelino's voice was smaller now, but still defiant. "Maybe she wants normal. Safe. Maybe." Danilo picked up his whiskey again. "But that's not your decision to make. It's hers. Then let her make it without you intimidating everyone who gets close to her." Danilo smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "You think this is intimidation? This is me being polite. This is me giving you an out while you can still walk away clean." He leaned in slightly. "Sarah called in sick this week. All week. Because of what happened Friday. Because I made her evening difficult. Do you know what I did after she hung up on me?" Abelino didn't answer. "Nothing." Danilo's voice was soft, almost gentle. "I did nothing. I didn't call her. I didn't show up at her apartment. I didn't send flowers or apologies or any of the things a good man would do. Because I'm not a good man, Abelino. I'm the kind of man who tracks your schedule and shows up at your social events to have conversations like this one." He finished his whiskey in one swallow. "The kind of man who will smile at you in public while explaining exactly how many ways your life could become complicated if you continue pursuing someone who belongs in my world, not yours. She's not your property. No." Danilo set down his empty glass. "She's worse. She's my necessity, and I protect my necessities with everything I have." He pulled out his wallet and placed several bills on the bar, more than enough to cover both drinks and a generous tip. Enjoy your evening, Abelino. Give my regards to your friends. They seem like nice people. He adjusted his jacket, covering the holster again. It would be a shame if anything disrupted your nice, safe life. Danilo walked away before Abelino could respond, moving back through the crowd with the same predatory grace he'd arrived with. Behind him, he knew Abelino was standing frozen at the bar, his beer forgotten, his mind racing to process what had just happened. Outside, the night air was cool against his skin. Marco was waiting by the car, one look at Danilo's face telling him everything he needed to know. How'd it go, boss? He's a good man. Danilo climbed into the back seat. He'll do the right thing. Which is? Danilo looked out the window as Marco pulled away from the curb. In the side mirror, he could see Abelino emerging from the club, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. Walking away, Danilo said quietly, before he gets hurt. The car merged into traffic, carrying Danilo back toward his estate and away from the wreckage of another man's courage. He told himself it was for Sarah's protection, that he was saving her from the complications of being caught between two worlds. But the taste of whiskey and lies was bitter on his tongue, and somewhere in the darkness of the car, Danilo knew the truth. He wasn't protecting Sarah from anything. He was protecting himself from losing her. And he just fired the first shot in a war that only one of them knew they were fighting. Sarah returned to the office on Monday morning like a storm given human form. Danilo was on a conference call with Tokyo when Marco knocked on his door, his expression somewhere between concerned and terrified. Boss. Marco's voice was quiet but urgent. You need to see this. I'm on a call. I know, but you really need to see this. Something in Marco's tone made Danilo hold up a hand to pause the presentation on his screen. He muted his microphone and turned to face his second-in-command with a look that promised consequences if this interruption wasn't justified. Marco just pointed toward the outer office. Danilo stood and moved to his doorway, and the entire world seemed to tilt sideways. Sarah was at her desk. She was wearing the emerald dress, the same one from the bistro, the one that had made something feral wake up in his chest. The silk caught the morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning her skin luminous. Her hair was down today, falling in those same loose waves that had tormented him all week. She'd paired the dress with heels that made her legs look endless, and when she leaned forward to type something on her keyboard, the neckline shifted just enough to make Danilo's mouth go dry. She looked like someone wrapped in silk, and she was doing it deliberately. Boss. Marco's voice was very far away. The Tokyo call? Danilo couldn't remember what Tokyo wanted. Couldn't remember his own name. Every functioning brain cell had redirected to the singular task of not crossing that office and doing something that would get them both fired or arrested or both. Sarah looked up as if she could feel his stare. Their eyes met across the space, and something electric crackled in the air between them. Her expression was perfectly neutral, professionally pleasant, but her eyes held a challenge. She knew exactly what she was doing. Reschedule Tokyo, Danilo said without looking at Marco. Tell them something came up. Boss, this deal has been 3 months in the... Reschedule it. Marco wisely retreated. Danilo remained in his doorway, one hand braced against the frame, watching Sarah pretend to work. She was shuffling papers with unnecessary focus, her movements precise and controlled, but he could see the slight tremor in her fingers, could see the way her breathing had changed the moment their eyes met. She was nervous. Good. So was he. He forced himself to move, crossing the space between his office and her desk with measured steps. Each one felt like walking toward something dangerous, something that would detonate if he made the wrong move. Sarah didn't look up as he approached. Good morning, Mr. Milani. I trust you had a productive week. Her tone was pure poison wrapped in politeness. Sarah. His voice came out rougher than intended. What are you doing? Working. She finally lifted her eyes to his, and the defiance in them was unmistakable. Isn't that what you wanted? For me to be here at my desk, doing my job? You know that's not what I meant. Do I? She tilted her head slightly. Because you denied my personal days. You made it clear my presence was required. So here I am. Present. Danilo's hands curled into fists at his sides. The tattoos on his knuckles seemed to writhe in the morning light. The dress. What about it? You wore it on your date. I wore it to dinner. Sarah's smile was sharp enough to cut. And now I'm wearing it to work. Is there a dress code violation I'm not aware of? Sarah, unless you'd like me to go home and change. She stood, and the movement made the silk shift and flow over her body in ways that should be illegal in a professional setting. I can do that, Mr. Milani, but then you'd be without your indispensable assistant for another few hours. And we both know how well that worked out last week. She was baiting him, pushing buttons she knew would make him react. And the worst part was he could see exactly what she was doing and still couldn't stop himself from taking the bait. Sit down. I prefer to stand. That wasn't a request. Neither is this. Sarah crossed her arms, and the gesture somehow made the dress even more distracting. I'm done playing whatever game this is, Danilo. You want to hear? Fine. I'm here. But I'm going to dress how I want, see who I want, and live my life how I want. And you're going to have to find a way to deal with that. The sound of his first name from her lips after a week of Mr. Milani hit him like a physical blow. He moved closer, eliminating the professional distance between them until he could smell her perfume, something subtle and warm that made him think of silk sheets and moonlight. You think this is a game? His voice dropped lower, dangerous. You think wearing that dress is going to prove some kind of point? I think you need to be reminded that I'm not your possession. Sarah lifted her chin, refusing to back down even with him looming over her. I think you need to see that you can't control every aspect of my life just because you pay my salary. Is that what you think this is about? Control? Isn't it? Danilo's jaw worked. They were close enough now that he could see the pulse fluttering at her throat, could see the way her pupils had dilated despite her defiant words. She was affected by this proximity as much as he was, and they both knew it. You want to know what this is about? He leaned down, his mouth near her ear. It's about the fact that I can barely breathe when you're not here. It's about spending a week in hell because you decided to call in sick. It's about seeing you in that dress and wanting to burn every other piece of clothing you own so you'll never wear anything else. Sarah's breath caught. Danilo, it's about the fact that I went to see your civil engineer. The confession came out before he could stop it. 3 nights ago, at a club. And I made sure he understood exactly what would happen if he continued pursuing you. The color drained from Sarah's face. You what? I warned him off. Danilo straightened, his expression hard. Politely. No one got hurt. But I made my position clear. Your position. Sarah's voice shook with barely contained fury. Your position on my personal life. On who I'm allowed to see. Yes. You had no right. I had every right. His eyes blazed. You think I'm going to stand by and watch some civilian with good intentions drag you into a life that will bore you to tears? Watch you settle for safe when you're made for something so much more? That's not your decision to make. Neither is wearing that dress to work. Danilo's control was fraying, his voice rising to match hers. But here we are, Sarah. Here we are playing chicken with each other because neither of us knows how to have a normal conversation about what's happening between us. Nothing is happening between us. But her voice wavered. Liar. The word hung between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Sarah stared at him, her chest heaving, her brown eyes bright with emotions she couldn't name. Around them, the office had gone silent. Somewhere in the building, people were working, making calls, living their normal lives. But in this space, in this moment, there was only the two of them and everything they couldn't say. You can't do this, Sarah whispered finally. You can't sabotage my dates and dictate my wardrobe and expect me to just accept it. I know, you can't want me and push me away at the same time. I know that too. Then what do you want, Danilo? Her voice broke on his name. What do you actually want from me? He looked at her, really looked at her. At the emerald silk and the defiant eyes and the trembling hands she was trying so hard to keep steady. At this woman who'd spent a week punishing him with silence, and then returned wearing armor made of the same dress that had started everything. I want you to stop wearing that dress to work, he said quietly. Because if you don't, I'm going to do something we'll both regret. Like what? Danilo's eyes dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. The answer was written in every line of his body, in the way his tattooed hands trembled with the effort of not reaching for her. Like proving to you that you're not as unaffected by me as you pretend to be. Sarah's lips parted. The air between them crackled with tension so thick it was almost visible. Mr. Milani? Marco's voice came from the doorway, cautious and uncertain. The Romano team is here for the 10 o'clock meeting. The spell broke. Danilo stepped back, his expression shuddering. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. Marco disappeared. Sarah turned away, her hands gripping the edge of her desk. Her shoulders were rigid, her breathing uneven. This conversation isn't over, Danilo said. Yes, it is. Sarah didn't look at him. Go to your meeting, Danilo. I have work to do. He wanted to argue, wanted to close the distance between them again and finish what they'd started. But Marco was waiting, and the Romano team was important, and he'd already lost enough control for one morning. Danilo walked toward the conference room, his mind still full of emerald silk and the challenge in Sarah's eyes. Behind him, Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe, collapsing in her chair with shaking hands and the knowledge that she'd just declared war on a man who never lost. And the worst part was she couldn't tell if she wanted to win or wanted him to. The text came through on Wednesday evening while Sarah was getting ready. Dinner tomorrow? I know things got complicated last time, but I'd like to try again. No pressure. Sarah stared at Abelino's message for a long time. She should say no. Should recognize that getting involved with him, while Danilo was circling like a shark scenting blood, was cruel to everyone involved, especially Abelino. But the emerald dress gambit had only partially worked. Danilo was rattled, yes. Off balance, absolutely. But he was still denying her personal days, still hovering over her desk like a territorial ghost, still looking at her with those dark eyes that promised things she shouldn't want. She typed back, tomorrow works. 8 o'clock? His response was almost immediate. Perfect. I'll pick you up. Sarah didn't tell Danilo about the date. Didn't mention it when she left the office Thursday at 5:30 sharp, her shoulders straight and her expression unreadable. If he noticed her leave earlier than usual, he didn't comment. But she felt his eyes on her all the way to the elevator. Abelino arrived at her apartment at exactly 8, holding flowers and wearing a nervous smile that made Sarah's chest tight with guilt. He looked like hope and safety and everything uncomplicated. Everything Danilo wasn't. You look beautiful, Abelino said, and he meant it in the simple, straightforward way that normal men meant things. Sarah had chosen a different dress tonight, a deep burgundy that was elegant without being provocative, a peace offering to whatever gods governed terrible decisions and complicated feelings. Thank you. She took the flowers, set them in water, and grabbed her clutch. Where are we going? There's a new place on the east side. Italian. I thought we could try. He stopped mid-sentence when they stepped outside. Danilo was leaning against a black car parked directly in front of Sarah's building. He was dressed in all black, his tattooed hands visible in the streetlight, his expression unreadable, but his presence impossible to ignore. You have got to be kidding me, Sarah breathed. Abelino went rigid beside her. Is that? Yes. Sarah felt anger spike hot and fast through her veins. Stay here. Sarah, maybe we should just... But she was already marching toward Danilo with fury in every step. He straightened as she approached, his dark eyes tracking her movement like he was memorizing every detail. When she stopped 3 feet away, close enough to see the muscle ticking in his jaw, he had the audacity to smile. Good evening, Sarah. What are you doing here? Enjoying the night air. His gaze flicked past her to where Abelino stood frozen on her doorstep. Going somewhere? That's none of your business. Everything about you is my business. No. Sarah's voice was low but vibrating with rage. It's really not. You're my employer, Danilo. Not my keeper. Not my father. And certainly not my... She stopped herself, but the unspoken word hung between them anyway. Boyfriend. Danilo's expression darkened. I thought we had an understanding after Monday. An understanding? Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean when you admitted to threatening Abelino? When you confessed to sabotaging my personal life? That understanding, I was honest with you. You were possessive and controlling. She stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. And now you're following me. Do you have any idea how insane this is? I'm not following you. His voice was calm, too calm. I'm making sure you're safe. From what? A man who brings me flowers and wants to take me to dinner? A man who treats me like a person instead of a problem to be solved. Danilo's jaw clenched. He's not right for you. You don't get to decide that. Someone has to, because you're clearly not thinking straight. The words hit like a slap. Sarah felt something snap inside her, some last thread of patience or professionalism or whatever had been holding her back. Not thinking straight, she repeated slowly. Because I want a normal life? Because I want to date someone who doesn't run background checks on people I have dinner with? Because I want more than being someone's assistant who exists exclusively within the walls of your empire? That's not what you are to me. Then what am I, Danilo? She threw her hands up. Tell me. Because I've been trying to figure out for 3 years, and I still don't have an answer. He stepped closer, eliminating the distance between them. You know what you are? No, I don't. 1 minute you're pushing me away, the next you're showing up at my apartment. 1 minute I'm just your employee, the next you're warning off men who look at me. So tell me, Danilo, what am I to you? Behind her, Sarah heard Abelino approach. His footsteps were hesitant but determined. Sarah, his voice was careful. Maybe we should just go. This seems like something you two need to work out. There's nothing to work out, Sarah said without taking her eyes off Danilo. Mr. Milani was just leaving. Mr. Milani, Danilo repeated softly. We're back to that. We never left it. Liar. Sarah's hand moved before she could think, her palm connecting with his cheek in a crack that echoed off the buildings around them. The sound seemed to freeze time itself. Danilo's head turned with the impact, but he didn't step back, didn't raise his hand to his face, just slowly turned back to look at her with eyes that burned like coals. Feel better. His voice was deadly quiet. No. Sarah's hand was shaking. No, I don't. Because you keep doing this. You keep pushing and pushing until I lose control. And then you look at me like I'm the one being unreasonable. You just hit me. You showed up at my home uninvited. You're stalking me, Danilo. This is stalking. I'm protecting you. From what? Sarah's voice rose, attracting attention from people passing on the street. From happiness? From normalcy? From having a life that doesn't revolve around you and your world and your rules. Danilo's hands curled into fists at his sides. The tattoos seemed to writhe in the streetlight. That's not what this is. Then what is it? She was shouting now, all pretense of control abandoned. Tell me what gives you the right to control my life. Tell me what gives you the right to threaten people I care about. Tell me. I love you. The words hit the air like a bomb. Sarah stopped breathing. Behind her, Abelino made a small sound of understanding and defeat. Around them, the city continued its evening rhythm, oblivious to the 3 people frozen in the wreckage of a confession. What? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Danilo looked at her with something raw and terrible in his eyes. I love you. I have loved you for longer than I should admit. And the thought of watching you with him, with anyone, makes me want to destroy things. That's not love. Sarah's words came out broken. That's obsession. Maybe. He moved closer, his voice dropping to something intimate and devastating. Maybe I don't know the difference anymore. Maybe I'm so far gone that I can't tell where protection ends and possession begins. But I do know that you're the only thing in my life that feels real. The only thing that matters. You can't just... Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You can't drop that on me here. Now, in front of... She turned to look at Abelino, who was standing several feet back, his expression sad and knowing. It's okay, Abelino said quietly. I get it now. Why you kept canceling. Why you seemed so distracted when we talked. He looked at Danilo, then back at Sarah. He's in love with you. And you. He paused. You're in love with him too, aren't you? No. But the denial was weak. Sarah. Abelino's smile was gentle, resigned. I've been on the wrong side of this equation before. I know what it looks like when someone's heart belongs to someone else. That's not, Sarah tried again. You don't owe me anything. Abelino took a step back. I knew something was complicated the first night. I just didn't realize how complicated until now. He glanced at Danilo one more time. Take care of her. Actually take care of her, or I'll figure out how to be brave enough to come back." He walked away, disappearing around the corner before Sarah could find words to stop him. She turned back to Danilo, her chest heaving, her hands shaking. "You had no right." Her voice was quiet now, drained of all its earlier fury. "You had no right to do that. To say that. Not here. Not like this. I know. You ruined it. Again. I know. You can't just say you love me and expect everything to be okay. You can't just. I don't expect anything." Danilo's voice was rough. "I don't expect you to forgive me or understand me or even want to see me tomorrow. But I needed you to know. I needed you to understand why I can't just let you go." Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm evening. "You don't get to make that choice for me, Danilo. You don't get to decide who I love or who loves me. You're right. Then why are you still here?" He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unguarded in a way she'd never seen before. "Because even if you tell me to leave, even if you hate me, I need to know you made it home safe. I need to know." His voice cracked. "I need to know you're okay." "I'm not okay." Sarah's tears finally spilled over. "I'm not okay because you just blew up my life. Again. And the worst part is I can't even hate you for it, because some terrible part of me." She stopped, shaking her head. "Say it," Danilo whispered. "No. Sarah. Go home, Danilo." She turned toward her building. "Just go home and let me think. Will you come to work tomorrow?" She laughed, and it sounded broken. "I don't know. I don't know anything anymore." Sarah walked into her building without looking back, leaving Danilo standing alone on the street with his confession hanging in the air and the knowledge that he'd just crossed a line he could never uncross. Inside her apartment, Sarah collapsed against the door, slid down to the floor, and finally let herself cry for the normal life she'd just lost and the complicated one she couldn't seem to escape. Outside, Danilo stood on the sidewalk for 5 minutes before Marco pulled up in the car. His second-in-command took one look at his face and wisely said nothing during the drive back to the estate. The silence stretched between them like a wound. When they arrived, Danilo went straight to his study without a word to the staff. He closed the door, locked it, and stood in the center of the room as the last light of evening bled from the sky. He didn't turn on the lights. The darkness felt appropriate, fitting. He moved to the window and stared out at the manicured grounds that stretched into shadow, seeing nothing but Sarah's face when he'd said those 3 words. The way her expression had cracked. The way her tears had started to fall just as she'd turned away. "I love you." He'd finally said it. After 3 years of swallowing the words, of burying them under professionalism and distance and the fiction that what he felt was merely appreciation for a competent employee, he detonated them in the middle of a street like a grenade with no pin. And now he had to live with the fallout. Danilo poured himself a whiskey, then another. The alcohol did nothing to numb the ache spreading through his chest. He'd felt pain before. Physical pain was familiar, almost comfortable. Broken ribs, knife wounds, the burn of a bullet grazing skin. Those were things he understood, things he could quantify and treat and overcome. This was different. This was the pain of watching someone you love look at you like you're a monster and knowing they're absolutely right. He moved to his desk and sank into the leather chair, the whiskey glass dangling from his tattooed fingers. In the darkness, the ink on his hands looked like shadows trying to crawl off his skin. How many men had these hands hurt? How many lives had he destroyed with nothing more than a phone call or a quiet word in the right ear? And now those same hands shook because a woman with brown eyes and a backbone of steel had walked away from him. The irony wasn't lost on him. His phone buzzed. A text from Marco. She made it inside safely. Light went on in her apartment 3 minutes ago. Of course Marco had stayed to watch. Danilo had trained him too well. He didn't respond. Just set the phone face down and took another drink. The study was silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Each second felt like an eternity. Danilo closed his eyes and let his head fall back against the chair. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to really feel something beyond the controlled calculation that governed his existence. He felt alive. The realization hit him like a physical blow. When was the last time anything had made him feel this way? When was the last time his heart had raced for reasons that had nothing to do with danger or adrenaline? When was the last time he'd cared about something beyond the next deal, the next acquisition, the next consolidation of power? He couldn't remember. His life had become a series of chess moves, each one calculated for maximum advantage. He'd built an empire on cold logic and colder violence, surrounded himself with people who feared him more than they respected him, and convinced himself that numbness was the same thing as control. And then Sarah Shade had walked in his office 3 years ago with her resume and her steady gaze and her complete refusal to be intimidated by him, and everything had started to crack. At first, he told himself it was just attraction. Physical, base, something that would fade once the novelty wore off. But it hadn't faded. It had grown, deepened, transformed into something that terrified him precisely because he couldn't control it. He couldn't control the way his day felt incomplete until he heard her voice. Couldn't control the way he found excuses to call her into his office just to have her near. Couldn't control the rage that had consumed him when he saw her laughing with another man. When he realized she had a whole life he knew nothing about, full of possibilities that didn't include him. The jealousy had been a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. And somewhere in the flames, Danilo had realized something fundamental had changed. He wasn't just alive. He was desperate to stay that way. For 3 years, he'd been sleepwalking through his existence, going through motions that had stopped meaning anything long ago, building wealth he didn't need, accumulating power that brought him no joy, surrounding himself with luxury that felt like a prison with better furniture. Sarah made him feel human, made him remember what it was like to want something beyond the next deal, made him care about tomorrow because it meant seeing her again. And now he'd driven her away with the very feelings she'd awakened in him. Danilo opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling of his darkened study. The shadows seemed to press down on him, heavy and suffocating. He thought about calling her, thought about driving back to her apartment and standing outside until she agreed to talk to him. Thought about using every resource at his disposal to force a resolution, because waiting, not knowing, was its own special torture. But he didn't move, because somewhere between the bistro and tonight, between the emerald dress and the slap that still burned on his cheek, he learned something Sarah had been trying to teach him all along. Love wasn't about control. The thought was revolutionary, terrifying. Everything in his world ran on control. His business, his reputation, his survival, all of it depended on his ability to dictate terms and eliminate variables and ensure outcomes. But Sarah wasn't a variable. She was a force of nature, and you couldn't control a force of nature. You could only choose whether to run from it or let it transform you completely. He'd spent the last 2 weeks trying to do both and succeeding at neither. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a call, not a text. Antonio's name lit up the screen. Danilo answered without speaking. "The construction firm is asking questions," Antonio said. Padavisi apparently mentioned an incident at a club. "They're wondering if they should be concerned about legal issues." "Tell them there won't be any legal issues." "You sure about that, boss? Because threatening civilians tends to—" "I said there won't be any issues." Danilo's voice was flat. "Padavisi is out of the picture. Leave it alone." A pause. "You all right?" The question caught Danilo off guard. Antonio never asked personal questions. In 15 years of service, the man had maintained perfect professional distance. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you sound different." Antonio's voice was carefully neutral. "And Marco said something happened tonight. With Miss Shade." Danilo closed his eyes. Of course Marco had talked to Antonio. Of course his entire organization probably knew by now that their boss had fallen apart over a woman. "I told her I loved her," Danilo heard himself say. The words felt strange in his mouth, like speaking a foreign language. And she walked away. Silence stretched across the line. "For what it's worth," Antonio finally said, "I think she'll come back." "Why?" "Because in 3 years, she never quit. Not when you were impossible. Not when you pushed her harder than anyone else. Not even when you denied her personal days for no good reason except spite." Antonio paused. "She stayed because she wanted to. That means something. It means she's stubborn. It means she cares. Antonio's voice softened slightly. And people who care don't give up easy, even when they probably should. The line went dead. Danilo sat in his darkened study, the whiskey forgotten, and let Antonio's words settle over him like a blanket. Sarah had stayed. Through 3 years of his moods and his demands and his inability to express anything resembling a normal human emotion, she'd stayed. Until he'd pushed too far. The clock struck midnight, the chimes echoing through the silent house. Danilo stood and moved back to the window, watching the moon rise over his empty estate. He'd spent his entire adult life building walls. Walls of money and power and reputation that kept everyone at a safe distance. Walls that meant he never had to feel vulnerable or exposed or dependent on anyone. Sarah had walked through those walls like they were made of paper. And the jealousy, the rage, the desperate possessiveness that had consumed him for the past 2 weeks, that was just his walls trying to rebuild themselves. His old patterns reasserting control. His fear of vulnerability manifesting as aggression. But underneath all of it, underneath the monster he'd become so good at being, was just a man who'd finally found something worth fighting for and had no idea how to fight without destroying it. Danilo pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered to his reflection, to the darkness, to whatever gods might be listening to a man who'd spent his life spitting in their faces. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He couldn't go back to the numbness. Couldn't return to sleepwalking through his days, pretending that empire and power were enough to fill the emptiness inside him. Sarah had made him feel alive, and now he had to figure out how to deserve the life she'd given him. Danilo didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his study until the darkness gave way to gray dawn, turning over a single memory in his mind like a jeweler examining a diamond for flaws. It had been 8 months ago, late evening in the office, both of them working through a merger that had required Sarah's presence past midnight. She'd been tired, her usual sharp focus softened by exhaustion, and in that vulnerability, she'd started talking about things that had nothing to do with contracts or business. Books, specifically rare books. "There's this edition of Dante's Inferno," she'd said, her voice almost dreamy. "Illustrated by Gustave Doré in 1861. The engravings are supposed to be breathtaking. I saw it once in a museum when I was in college, and I stood there for an hour just staring at the craftsmanship." Danilo had looked up from his laptop. "You read Dante?" "In the original Italian." She'd smiled at his surprise. "My grandmother was from Naples. She made me learn the language, made me read the classics. Said I needed to understand where beauty comes from before I could recognize it in the world." "And you think beauty comes from Dante's hell?" "I think beauty comes from acknowledging the darkness and finding meaning in it anyway." Sarah had met his eyes then, and something in her gaze had made his chest tight. Sometimes the most beautiful art comes from the deepest pain. The conversation had shifted back to business after that, and Danilo had filed the information away without consciously deciding to remember it. But his mind worked like a vault, storing everything about Sarah whether he wanted it to or not. Now, as the sun began to rise over his estate, he knew exactly what he needed to do. He made 3 phone calls before 7 a.m. The first was to a rare book dealer in Florence who owed him a favor. The second was to a private courier. The third was to Marco, with instructions that were simple and non-negotiable. "I need the office to myself until 9, Danilo said. "No one enters, especially not Sarah if she comes in early. And if she asks why, tell her I'm in a meeting. Tell her anything. Just give me until 9. By 8:30, Danilo was standing in Sarah's empty office with a package under his arm and something he hadn't felt in years crawling through his chest. Nervousness. The book had cost more than most people made in a year. The dealer in Florence had nearly wept when Danilo explained what he needed. "That edition hasn't been on the market in decades, Signor Milani. To find one in pristine condition, with all the original plates intact." "Find it," Danilo had said. "Money is no object." The dealer had called back within 2 hours. A private collector in Rome, willing to part with his copy for a price that would make most men's eyes water. Danilo had agreed without blinking, and the courier had delivered it to the estate by midnight. Now it sat on Sarah's desk, wrapped in archival paper with a care that bordered on reverence. Beside it, Danilo placed an envelope. Inside was a single card with 4 words written in his own hand, each letter formed with more thought than he'd given to any contract he'd ever signed. I don't know how to share. He stared at the message for a long moment, wondering if it was enough. Wondering if anything would be enough after what he'd done. Then he set the card against the book and stepped back. The office looked the same as it always did. Sarah's desk was organized with military precision, every pen in its place, every file labeled and sorted. But now, there was this offering sitting in the center of it all, a confession wrapped in 19th century engravings and leather binding. Danilo turned to leave, then stopped. He moved back to the desk and picked up the card. His hand hovered over it, the pen from Sarah's holder gripped between tattooed fingers. Then, before he could second-guess himself, he added one more line beneath the first. But I want to learn. For you. He left before he could change his mind. Sarah arrived at 8:50, and Danilo watched from his office doorway as she stopped dead in the entrance to hers. She set down her bag slowly, her eyes fixed on the package. For a long moment, she didn't move, just stood there staring like the book might explode if she looked away. Then, carefully, she approached her desk. Danilo's heart was hammering. He'd faced down armed men without flinching, had negotiated deals worth millions without breaking a sweat, but watching Sarah reach for that envelope made him feel like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. She opened it, read the card, and went completely still. Her fingers traced over the words once, twice. Then she looked up, and her eyes found him standing in his doorway like he'd known they would. They stared at each other across the space between their offices. Neither spoke. Neither moved. The morning light streaming through the windows caught on Sarah's face, highlighting the shadows under her eyes that said she'd slept as poorly as he had. Finally, Sarah looked back down at the book. She unwrapped it with reverence, her breath catching when she saw the cover. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing the first engraving. Dora's vision of hell, rendered in such exquisite detail that even from where Danilo stood, he could see the way the light played across the centuries-old paper. Danilo. Sarah's voice was barely audible. This is the 1861 edition. He stepped in her office, each movement carefully measured. With all the original plates, the dealer confirmed the provenance. It's genuine. This must have cost. She stopped, shaking her head. You can't just give me something like this. I already did. Danilo, you said beauty comes from acknowledging the darkness. He moved closer, stopping at the edge of her desk. I'm trying to acknowledge mine. I'm trying to be honest about what I am and what I want and what I'm willing to change. Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. A book doesn't fix what happened last night. I know. It doesn't undo the threats or the stalking or the... I know that too. Danilo braced his hands on her desk, his tattooed fingers spread against the polished wood. But I don't know how else to show you that I'm trying. I want to be different. I want to be someone who deserves. He stopped, the words catching in his throat. Someone who deserves what? Sarah's voice was soft. You. The word hung between them like a prayer. Sarah closed the book with careful precision and met his eyes. I can't be your possession, Danilo. I don't want you to be. Then what do you want? He took a breath, steadying himself. I want you to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include me, even if it means watching you walk away and never come back. The words cost him, but he forced them out anyway. I want you to have the choice I've been trying to take from you. And if my choice is him, her voice was barely a whisper. If my choice is safe and normal and everything you're not, the question was a knife between his ribs, but Danilo didn't flinch. Then I'll accept it. I'll stop interfering. I'll let you go. He paused. But first, I need you to know that my choice is you. Has been you. Will always be you, whether you choose me back or not. Sarah stood, moving around the desk until she was close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes. Close enough that he could smell her perfume and feel the warmth radiating from her skin. That note says you don't know how to share, she said quietly. I don't, but you're willing to learn. For you, yes. Why? Danilo looked at her, really looked at her, and let every wall he'd ever built come down. Because the alternative is going back to being dead inside. And I can't do that. Not now that I know what it feels like to be alive. Sarah's hand moved, her fingers brushing against his tattooed knuckles. The touch was feather-light, barely there, but it sent electricity racing through his entire body. I don't know if I can trust you, she whispered. I know. I don't know if this can work. I know that too. Then why are we doing this? Danilo turned his hand over, letting her fingers rest against his palm. Because some things are worth the risk. And you, Sarah Shade, are worth every risk I have left to take. She didn't pull away, didn't step back, just stood there with her hand in his, staring at the book on her desk and the man before her, trying to decide which version of hell she was willing to walk through. Outside, the city woke up around them. Inside, two people stood in the space between their offices and their worlds, holding onto each other like lifelines while they figured out if love was enough to bridge the darkness between them. The book sat on Sarah's desk, a peace offering from a man who'd never learned how to surrender. And in the silence between heartbeats, something new began to take shape. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But possibility. Sarah pulled her hand back first. The loss of contact felt like tearing away skin, but she needed space to think, to breathe, to process the weight of what Danilo had just offered her. I need time, she said quietly. Danilo nodded, his expression carefully controlled. Take all the time you need, and I need you to leave. Just for now, I need to be alone with this. She gestured to the book, to the card, to the impossibility of everything happening between them. All right. He moved toward his office, then paused at the threshold. Sarah. She looked up. Thank you. His voice was rough. For not walking out. For still being here. Then he was gone, disappearing into his office and closing the door with a quiet click that somehow felt louder than any slam. Sarah sank in her chair, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. She pulled the book closer, running her fingers over the leather binding, feeling the history embedded in every crease and corner. Then she picked up the card again, reading the words until they blurred. I don't know how to share, but I want to learn. For you. The rest of the day passed in a strange limbo. Sarah worked mechanically, fielding calls and processing documents while her mind spun in circles. Danilo stayed in his office. She could see him through the glass partition when she allowed herself to look, which was more often than she wanted to admit. He was on calls, reviewing contracts, doing all the normal things, but there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Like he was waiting for a verdict he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. At 5:30, Marco stopped by her desk. Boss wants to know if you need anything before I head out. Sarah looked at the closed office door. Tell him I'm fine. You sure? Because he's been checking his watch every 10 minutes like. Marco! Sarah's tone was gentle but firm. I'm fine. Go home. Marco left, throwing one last concerned look at Danilo's office before disappearing into the elevator. The building emptied around them. 6 o'clock came and went. Then 7. The cleaning crew made their rounds, nodding politely at Sarah before moving on. Through the windows, the city lights began to sparkle as dusk settled over everything. At 7:30, Sarah stood. She picked up the card, held it for a moment, then walked to Danilo's door and knocked. Come in. He was standing at his window, hands in his pockets, his silhouette sharp against the cityscape behind him. He turned when she entered, and the hope in his eyes was so naked it hurt to look at. We need to talk, Sarah said. I know. He gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. Please. Sarah didn't sit. Instead, she held up the card. This note. These words. Do you actually mean them? Everyone. Because I need to know if this is real or if this is just another tactic. Another way to keep me here, keep me controlled, keep me. It's real. Danilo moved closer, stopping a few feet away. It's the most real thing I've said in years. Sarah's grip tightened on the card. Tell me what you're afraid of. The question caught him off guard. She could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, in the brief flash of vulnerability before his defenses tried to slam back into place. Don't, she said sharply. Don't put the walls back up. Not now. You said you wanted to be honest. So be honest. Tell me what you're actually afraid of. Danilo was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I'm afraid that if I let you go, even for a second, I'll lose you. That you'll realize you're better off without me. That you deserve more than what I can give you. And you'll walk away and never look back. He paused. I'm afraid of going back to the emptiness. Of watching my life happen without feeling any of it. Of being the monster everyone thinks I am without having someone who sees the man underneath. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Is that what you think I do? See the man underneath. You're the only one who ever has. His dark eyes held hers. 3 years, Sarah. 3 years of you treating me like a person instead of title. Of you calling me on my bullshit. Of you refusing to be intimidated. Of you making me laugh when I'd forgotten how. You made me human again. And the thought of losing that, of losing you, his voice cracked. It terrifies me more than anything I've ever faced. Sarah set the card down on his desk with careful precision. You know what terrifies me? Tell me that I'll stay and you'll slip back into old patterns. That the moment I commit to this, to us, you'll decide you've won and go right back to treating me like property. That this version of you, the vulnerable one admitting his fears, will disappear the second you feel secure. I won't. You don't know that. Sarah's voice was firm. You can't promise me that, Danilo, because you've spent your entire adult life building systems of control. It's in your DNA, and I need to know that you understand the difference between loving me and owning me. Danilo ran a hand through his hair, the gesture uncharacteristically uncertain. I'm not sure I do understand the difference. Not completely. Not yet. The honesty of that admission knocked something loose in Sarah's chest. But I want to learn, he continued. I want you to teach me. I want you to call me out every time I slip, every time I try to control instead of trust, every time I forget that you're not mine to command. And if I do that, if I stay and teach you and call you out, what do I get in return? Danilo moved closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the silver starting to thread through his dark hair. You get all of me, not the boss, not the image, not the reputation. You get the man who lies awake at night thinking about you. The man who memorizes the way you take your coffee and the books you mention in passing. The man who's absolutely terrified that he's not good enough, but is willing to spend the rest of his life trying to be. Sarah's breath caught. That's a big promise from someone who doesn't know how to share. I know. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. But I'm a fast learner when I'm motivated. And Sarah, you motivate me more than anything else in this world. She studied him, really studied him. The expensive suit couldn't hide the vulnerability in his posture. The tattoos couldn't mask the hope and fear warring in his eyes. This was Danilo Milani stripped of every defense, offering himself up for judgment. If I choose this, Sarah said slowly, if I choose you, it's not because you're my boss. It's not because you gave me an expensive book or because you confess your feelings on a street corner. It's because I choose the man standing in front of me right now. The one who's scared and uncertain and willing to admit he doesn't have all the answers. I can live with that. Can you? Sarah stepped closer. Can you live with me having power over you? With me being the one thing you can't control? Because that's what this means, Danilo. If I stay, if we do this, you have to let me in. All the way in. No walls, no games, no manipulation. I know. And if you can't do that, if you slip back into treating me like your assistant instead of your partner, I will walk away. And when I do, there won't be any second chances. No grand gestures will bring me back. Do you understand? Danilo held her gaze. I understand. Then I need you to say it. I need you to make me a vow that actually means something. He took a breath, and when he spoke, every word was weighted with intention. I vow to see you as my equal, to trust you with the parts of me I've never shown anyone, to let you make your own choices, even when those choices terrify me, to learn how to love you without trying to own you. He paused, and I vow to be worthy of you choosing me every single day, because that's what you're doing. Choosing, not staying because you have to, but because you want to. Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. And I need you to know that I'm not choosing the Mafia boss. I'm choosing the man behind the mask. The one who remembers conversations from 8 months ago. The one who's standing here, scared out of his mind. That's who I'm choosing. Even knowing everything that comes with me. The danger, the complications, I've known about that for 3 years, Danilo. Sarah reached up, her hand cupping his jaw. The beard was soft under her fingers, and she could feel him trembling at her touch. I'm not walking into this blind. I'm walking into it with my eyes wide open, choosing you despite all the reasons I shouldn't. Why? Because you make me feel alive too. The admission cost her, but she gave it freely. Because 3 years of being near you has been both the most frustrating and the most electric experience of my life. Because some part of me has been waiting for you to stop hiding behind your walls and show me this version of yourself. Danilo's hand covered hers, holding it against his face like she might disappear if he let go. I'm still going to mess this up, probably frequently. I know, and I'm still going to struggle with jealousy and control and all the things I've built my life around. I know that too. Sarah smiled, and it was real. But now I have permission to call you out, to remind you that I'm here by choice. And Danilo, yes, the moment you forget that, the moment you try to cage me again, I will remind you of this conversation. And you will listen, because that's what partners do. Partners. He tested the word, and something in his expression softened. I like the sound of that. Good, because that's what we are now. Sarah let her hand drop, but she didn't step away. Not boss and assistant, not owner and possession. Partners, equals. Two people choosing each other despite all the reasons we shouldn't. Danilo pulled her closer, his tattooed hands gentle on her waist. When you say it like that, it sounds almost possible. It is possible. Sarah looked up at him, at this man who'd turned her world upside down and then offered to build a new one with her. As long as we both remember that I'm here because I want to be, not because I have to be, I'll remember. He pressed his forehead to hers. I promise you, Sarah, I will remember. And in the quiet of his office, with the city lights sparkling below and the weight of 3 years finally lifting, Sarah Shade chose Danilo Milani. Not because he was powerful or wealthy or dangerous, but because underneath all the ink and iron and carefully constructed walls, he was just a man who'd forgotten how to be human until she reminded him. And that, Sarah decided, was worth every risk she had left to take.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.